All right, we'll call this meeting to order on the 24th of January, Labor, Health, and Social Services. Thanks you folks for being here. We have two bills before us. Senator Steinmetz is presenting a bill in another committee, so she may come in later, but I do have a proxy vote on the first bill. So with that, anything from the committee before we get started? Clayton, anything that we need to know? Do we have folks online on either of these bills? Two, okay, there you go. Perfect. They're both on 129, so we'll go to it'll be the second bill. Perfect. All right, let's go with the first bill. First bill for our consideration, Senate File 170, actually 71, not 171, 71, my apologies. And we're pleased to have Senator Brennan here with us. Senator Brennan, go ahead and explain your bill, and we appreciate you being here. We look forward to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First of all, thank you for letting me bring this bill to you guys this afternoon, and for hearing this. Just a little bit of kind of background before we go into this bill. This bill is really a criminal justice reform bill. During the interim, the Wyoming Department of Transportation and the Driver's Services brought up a clean up bill on their ignition interlocked-in restricted licensing stuff. And what I'm bringing before you today was originally part of that bill. It was taken out because it's a little bit more substantive than cleanup language, although the Department of Motor Vehicles felt that it was some cleanup, and I would agree with them. So basically, what this bill does and is about, and I'll just read on page 1 in the title of the bill, it sums it up, I think. Authorizing persons convicted of aggravated homicide by vehicle to be issued an ignition interlock restricted license. Then on page 1 and 2 we have the bill itself, which really we do this by adding language on lines 4, which says unless the person has first completed the period of revocation provided under Wyoming statutes 31-7-127B for each conviction under this section. And then the section 2, that this act shall apply to persons convicted of aggravated homicide by vehicle for causing the death of another person while operating or driving a vehicle in violation of Wyoming statutes 31-5-233. And then this becomes effective July 1 of 2025. So let me go into a little bit of the why this bill and why I thought it was important to run this bill and that we look at this. Currently, as the statute is written, if somebody is convicted under these statutes and has a blood alcohol content of 0.14, they're allowed to get an ignition interlock-in and get their driver's license back after the period of revocation. However, if they blow a 0.15 or greater, they're never allowed to get their driver's license back in the state of Wyoming or any other state ever for their life. And so what I feel like we have here is a case where if you're gonna blow a 0.15, we've got something that is beyond the, it goes to punitive. This is beyond the consequences that we have in our laws and in our green books, and it goes to punitive. So committee, that's why I'm bringing this bill before you, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Brennan. So just for the committee and for the audience and those who may be listening, obviously this is not a bill that would come before this committee in a natural course of business. And that's because we didn't have as much work as many of the other committees, including Judiciary. I think they're meeting 5 days a week right now, sometimes maybe even twice a day. So the president came and said, I'm going to send some bills to you, and I didn't get to pick which bills. He just said, I'm sending some bills, and lucky Senator Brennan got the luck of this committee. So just explanation that this is likely not something that would generally come before us, but that's the reason. Committee, any questions for Senator Brennan? Senator Hutchings.
Give me a moment to formulate it, so if someone else wants to.
Okay, any other questions? Senator Crum, please.
Yes, just a clarification. So if they would get their license back, they have to blow into the interlock device, period, to start the car.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask the Department of Motor Vehicles. They're the ones that put all this in place, and they know the complete nitty-gritties of all of this.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Please introduce yourself. Thank you for being here and provide testimony. And if you want to start with the question, that'd be great.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Crum, my name is Misty Zimmerman. I am the Program Manager for White Hat Driver Services. Just a little clarification on what Senator Brennan brought to you a little bit earlier. So if an individual is convicted of operating a motor vehicle while under the influence and they have a alcohol concentration of 0.08 to 0.14, there is no ignition interlock requirement imposed on that individual. At 0.15 or greater, that individual is required to have a ignition interlock license installed in their vehicle for the condition or for the time period required by law. And that's different based on the type, on the number of offenses that you have. So Senator Crum, can you just repeat your question for me, please?
Senator Crum.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, just a quick question. If they qualify to get their license back, in order to start the vehicle, they must blow into the interlock device, period, no exceptions.
Go ahead, please, Ms. Zimmerman.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Crum, you are correct. If they have an ignition interlock required license, that device must be installed in their vehicle prior to the issuance of that license, and they must meet all of the requirements, which is blowing in the device to start it, as well as meeting any rolling retests.
Chairman Barlow.
Thank you, please.
Just to clarify, so their own personal vehicle, I would understand that, but would that be true with any vehicle? They would not be allowed, let's say if they went to a rental car company and rented a car, they would not be able to drive that car unless they blew into that type of a device. Would that be correct?
Ms. Zimmerman.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Crum, you are correct. The restriction is on their actual license. The only reprieve they have for that is in a work-related vehicle. So if you have to operate a vehicle, let's say as part of your landscaping business, and you're operating that vehicle during the normal hours of business, you would not be, that vehicle would not be required to have an ignition interlock or device installed. A rental car, the license is on the restriction is on the driver license, so it must be installed and the driver must comply with those terms.
Chairman Barlow?
Please.
One last question. Driving to and from work, they would be required to blow into the.
Go ahead, Ms. Zimmerman.
device.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Crum, you are correct, if they were in their personal vehicle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Chairman Barlow, I appreciate that. I'm a little confused. So we have a person can't get the ignition interlock, unless they completed the period of revocation. So how do we know that they're blowing these numbers unless they have that lock, if I'm getting this correct?
Go ahead, Ms. Zimmerman. If you understood the question, you're
Yeah.
welcome to respond. If you don't understand the question,
Yeah.
we'll continue to try to clarify. Go ahead.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Hutchings, so the blood alcohol concentration would be on the arrest. So that would be how we would determine if there was an ignition interlock requirement, not as opposed to what you're talking about, is if the device is required, we would know that there is an alcohol concentration.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please proceed.
So I'm arrested on Monday and I've blown 1.5 or 0.15, however the numbers are. And it's Wednesday, I've gotten out of jail maybe, and I'm still trying to figure out how does this interlock play? And yeah, it's a little confusing to me. And then how do they know that someone's getting into a vehicle after they've blown the 1.5 or 0.05 or whatever? How do they know they're getting into a vehicle?
So, Ms. Zimmer, if you actually
Yeah.
just describe what the interlock
Maybe
device
that's-
is and how it operates from a practical sense, after the sentencing and all that, what occurs? Would you do that, please?
Chairman Barlow, I think it might be real quick to just start through the process. So a person's arrested
Certainly.
under a
Great.
DUI. If
Thank-
they blow a .15 or greater on their, on their implied consent, and then the department receives the conviction. So once the department, they're notified that they must have an ignition interlock device installed for the period what required by law. It's different for each one. At that point, they're given a certain grace period to come in and get that license, get the ignition interlock device installed in their or in their vehicle, get the license, and then they'll be required to meet the requirements of the ignition interlock device. So upon starting the vehicle, rolling retests, calibration, all of the things that are involved with the ignition interlock program. That period of time between arrest and conviction, they don't fall under this. There's a certain time frame, right? So this would only be upon the conviction of under 62106. If that individual was required to have an ignition interlock device, as the statute sits today, the department cannot issue them a driver's license ever. In 2019, the ability to sit out your requirement went away. So prior to offenses of July 1st of 2019, if you had an ignition interlock device required for your license, you could choose not to drive. We believe that this was missed during the change in 2019, and the intent is, if you look at 317402C, that allows a person to obtain an ignition interlock restricted license to drive during their period of revocation, okay? Original language in this bill disallowed that. But when we went to 2019 and that ability to sit that requirement out went away, this basically, because this says the department cannot ever issue you a ignition interlock restricted license, the person can never be issued a license. Where we're looking at, where we have struggles with sort of, if I blow a .14, there's no ignition interlock requirement, so I could be convicted under the same statute and blow between a .08 and a .14, and as soon as my period of revocation is over, I would have the ability to get a normal license again. If I blew a .15, I would not. I would never be able to get a license again because this statute disallows the department from issuing ignition interlock restricted license.
Thank you. I want to clarify something,
that
though.
was good.
For that .8 to 1.4, they can actually drive with an interlock device. They don't need, it's not required. With this change in the law, they're not going to be able to drive until they've actually served out that 1 to 3 years, if I remember looking at the statutes of, revocation. Is that accurate?
Chairman Barlow, regardless of the BAC, if this statute were to go into place, they would have to sit out that period of revocation through the end of it, the way that the change is worded, 1 to 3 years, whatever it is. I believe it's 1 year for this offense. And then they could be issued the ignition interlock device required license, or the non-restricted license in the case of a .08 to a .14 or a drug-related offense.
Thank you, but let's be clear. This is specific to homicide by vehicle. This is not just DUI, et cetera. Is that accurate, Ms. Zimmerman?
Chairman Barlow, you are correct.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure we weren't applying it to everything, and we're not. Okay. Further questions from the committee for Ms. Zimmerman? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam, for explaining that. That made a lot more sense to me with a nice flow. What prevents a person from allowing someone else to blow into their device?
But now we're getting into the operational of this program, I guess. Go ahead, Ms. Zimmer, if you'd like to. Actually, start with, how many interlock devices do we have in the state of Wyoming right now, if you happen to know that number? And then operationally, how you would deal with something like that. Thank you.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Hutchings, I don't know the number exactly, but I can get the number back to you from the committee, or for the committee. It's varying, obviously, it changes every day. Currently, right now, we don't have anything in our blowing into the device for another individual.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Further questions? Anything else, Senator Brennan or Ms. Zimmerman for the committee? All right. Well, Senator Hutchings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quickly, how favorable has this program been in the past? What have you seen as statistically, this is good, this is,
So I'm not sure, that's probably something you're going to get into. It's part of the law.
Yeah.
We put it in the statute. You're carrying out that law. Whether it's successful or not, you probably don't actually keep those kind of statistics because you wouldn't have available that kind of information. But you go ahead, Ms. Zimmerman.
Chairman Barlow, you are correct. I would defer to that exact answer.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else, Senator Brennan? None? All right, thank you very much. Does anybody in the room want to testify to this bill? All right, Mr. Lindholm, come on up. Anyone else plan to testify to this bill? I see Department of Health folks here. I see more Department of Transportation folks here. I see, no, all right. Hospital Association, all right. And no one online for this bill, is that correct? All right, Mr. Lindholm, please proceed on Senate File 71.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. On Senate File 71, the policy really underscores the seriousness of causing a loss of life due to driving under the influence, but it also maintains the integrity that we look for in the justice system. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a very serious crime. And as was previously stated, this was kind of a whoopsies from 2019 as far as it should have been included. We often look for, and the reason why Americans for Prosperity is supporting this legislation, we often look towards restorative justice, a way that we can get people back into society. And by crushing them for their entire life, you'll never be able to maintain that. And what we see is, and this happens, I wouldn't say often, but there are situations where individuals get multiple DUIs or a situation like this happens, and they'll still drive. They never feel like they can enter back into society through the norms or the modality that is provided for them, especially in a situation like this where it's not provided for in law. And so that's why we're supporting the legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Lindholm, former Representative Lindholm, any questions for Mr. Lindholm? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further testimony. Senator Brennan, any final comments? No? All right. And you're welcome to come back to the dais in case there are questions as we work the bill. I don't anticipate any, but you're welcome to if you'd like. All right, seeing no further discussion, closing public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill. Move the bill by Senator Scott. Discussion on the bill. Discussion on the bill. Seeing none. You're ready for the question. I'll just throw out a little something I think it is very applicable to this. Some of you will remember 7 UW athletes that were killed numerous years ago, 24 years ago, 3 years ago. Sorry, I can't remember the exact date. One of the mothers is from my community, and I've recently deceased, but I got to know her quite well, and she and the perpetrator of that crime became very close friends and went around the state working together to raise awareness about driving under the influence. And that's what this particular bill is. This bill has to do with homicide with driving under the influence, intoxicating liquor or controlled substances. So this individual I happen to go to church with this individual. It's not a secret who he is because he's out in the public. So what we do is we start restoring people back to their lives. He was actually the one that asked me about restoring his gun rights several years ago, and this is years after the crime, et cetera. So this is a part of a continuum, right? You give them access back to lives, and then as they proceed through life, and anyway, he was the one. So there's a small story in that, but it's directly out of this, and there was maybe something overlooked a couple of years ago, but it's part of that restorative process that Mr. Lindholm talked about. So, seeing no further discussion, thank you. Mr. Caldwell, would you call the roll on Senate File 71?
This is a roll call vote for Senate File 71. Senator Crum,
Aye.
Senator Hutchings? Is that an aye?
It is an aye.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz?
Senator Steinmetz leaves a proxy vote of aye on Senate File 71, and I'll provide that to you, Clayton.
Chairman Barlow?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that is 5 ayes.
Thank you very much. Senator Brennan, I will introduce the bill when it comes up on general file, on committee of the whole, and turn it over to you. All right, thank you very much. Thank you much, Ms. Zimmerman, for being here. I see Mr. Rossetti in the back, ready to provide backup. All right. Next bill for our consideration, and the sponsor got here. I didn't have to text him on my flip phone. Lucky for you, it'd take me a half an hour to get you texted. But the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 129, and we're joined by Representative Larson. I'm sorry, Senator Larson. We were in the House together, my apologies. Senator Larson, please proceed with your explanation of Senate File 129.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, other senators, for taking this, at least taking my testimony on the bill. This is Senate File 129. I have a lot of scratches on my page, so I'm not sure. I'm bringing this forward because it was last March, and 2 years ago, I guess. I read an article in the Cody Enterprise, and that's close to me, about 24 miles away. And I'm just going to kind of give you highlights of that article. It was about the West Park Hospital District Board's decision to suspend random drug testing policy. The article stated the CO reached out to the hospitals across the state. He said 24 were asked for information. 16 responded. Of those, 12 did not have a policy on random drug testing. After hearing that, the CO recommended his hospital suspend their random drug testing policy. I think that should be a big concern to our citizens. The hospital still tests prospective employees who are offered a job, those who display symptoms of drug or alcohol use while they're working, and I'm lost. And if an accident occurs, they would take a sample while on the job. The CEO then stated he estimates the hospital receives $42,000 discount on its workers' compensation insurance. So I want to clarify that they're receiving a discount. The policy for conducting random tests, so that would be a cost because they're not getting the discount. He stated the cost is relatively small compared to the impacts the random tests have had on employment levels. He estimates 2 or 3 employees are caught with THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, I didn't say that right, that's a tough one for me, THC, in their system annually. He said over the past 5 years, roughly 15 employees have been terminated due to this. So that's why I'm bringing the bill. I think our hospitals maybe need a little direction. It worries me that we might have people on the job not capable of doing what they need to. So this act's relating to public health and safety, requiring drug and alcohol testing program for all hospital employees, for potential employees holding or seeking positions requiring safety-sensitive duties. So that's a big word that we ought to look at. It's not for all employees at the hospital. They can direct it to be safety-sensitive duties. And I looked online. I don't know if we have something in the statutes that define that. I would have to dig a little deeper. Online you find where it's described that it would be some positions. So I'd like to maybe go through those. Medication administration, operating medical equipment, patient monitoring, anesthesial administration, blood product administration, surgical procedures, intravenous access placement, patient transport, hazardous materials. I mean, there's a lot of jobs that could be designated as safety sensitive. So I'll continue. So section 1 would create a new part in our statutes, 35-915, hospital employee drug alcohol testing program requirements. And then it's listed as a condition licensure through the department. Each hospital in the state shall utilize these things, a random drug and alcohol testing program for its employees and potential employees who hold or are seeking position require safety-sensitive duties. It requires them to use the Wyoming Professional Assistant Program for employees who test positive for the drugs and alcohol as an alternative to disciplinary actions. And in that, if they did receive a positive result on their test for drug or alcohol, right away they would immediately be removed from safety-sensitive duties, be evaluated by a qualified substance abuse counselor. Section C, it says drugs for purposes of this oh man, I jumped, I'm sorry. Sorry. Page 3, C, complete any counseling or other treatment recommended by the substance abuse counselor. D, have a negative drug and alcohol test before returning to any safety-sensitive duties. E, following the successful completion of the treatment program through the Wyoming Professional Assistance Program for a positive drug or alcohol test, any subsequent positive drug or alcohol test result it's administered to the employee shall be reported to the department, and who shall report the positive drug alcohol test to the appropriate licensing boards for determination of the person's further licensure within the state. So that would be on their second positive result. The department shall monitor compliance with the random drug and alcohol testing program through the department's health care facility licensure. And then we go to page 4. It states what drugs for purposes of this section are defined as those scheduled for controlled substance. This one is a little confusing to me. I don't know that much about the drugs. I'm guessing my doctor might know that's up there. I do have a correction on line 3. I think it's not substantial. I think that should be 35-7-1014. And then it goes through 35-7-122. And this is the descriptions of Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and Schedule 3, and Schedule 4, and Schedule 5. So I don't know, that we may need to discuss some more. And then in Section D, it describes which drugs would be, drugs excluding Schedule 1 drugs under this Section 35-7-114, consumed as a prescribed by a licensed healthcare provider, are not subject to this requirement of treatment for positive drug tests. So if you're on a drug that you need for your, to help you with your health issues, then this would not be affected. And then it's stated in Section E, the use of marijuana remains unlawful under the federal and Wyoming law, regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medical or recreational purpose in a locality where an employee may reside or visit. And then we have some statutes that need to be amended. On the bottom of page 4, and we go on to page 5, they're pretty easy. This act means, in the definition of applicability of provisions, in statute 35-901, it's, what is that, 27, section 27, XXVII. This act means 35-2901 through this statute that we're bringing. And then Section 3, the Department of Health shall promulgate rules necessary to implement the act. And then we have where the act will be effective of. So there's part of that, Section B, subsection B of this act shall be effective on July 1st. The remaining will be effective immediately. So that's probably all I have, and hopefully there's some questions.
Thank you. Questions for the bringer of the, Senator Crum? Question, please?
Mr. Chairman, my only question is, how come you just limited it to hospitals and not like surgical centers, urgent care facilities, long-term care? So I'm sure there's a list of them. Why just hospitals and not those other facilities?
Thank you. Senator Crum? Senator
That's
Larson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator Crum, thanks for that question. I probably was aiming more toward public ran or public funded, and maybe all those are, I'm not sure. I think some might be, but that was my intent.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify, this applies, the way I read it, to all hospitals, private, public, et cetera, because it's a function of licensure. Department of Health will come up in a bit and talk about that. So I just want to be clear.
Clarify that.
I don't know that we can, it'd be special legislation if we were going to just apply it to certain hospitals. And so I think the way I read it, it is broadly applicable, notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't apply to other healthcare facilities. I think if it was your intent to only have publicly funded or public, this bill does not reflect that. Nor do I think it would be appropriate for a bill to reflect that if a bill went forward. But aside from that, if that was your intent, you've got them, but you got everybody else too. That would be my thought. If you have any comment, go ahead.
Mr.
Senator.
Chairman, my mistake, I agree with you.
And so your intent was only
Yep.
to get with the public ones or all
No,
hospitals?
it would be all.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
it would be all.
Further questions?
sorry.
Further questions? I have a question, and I know you said we needed to talk about this some more, but I'd much rather that the sponsor of the bill have a better suggestion about what safety-sensitive duties are. I mean, that is, I don't know what that means, safety-sensitive duties. I know you gave a few suggestions of what that was, and you suggested you looked it up, but I think that will be critical in us understanding who this actually applies to, and we need to understand it, and then the employer, the hospital, will have to understand who that is as well. So if we're gonna use that term, it's gonna have to be defined. So I know you gave us some potential suggestions. I don't know that we're gonna be able to help you with that, without, more information, or if you have a further suggestion, but anyway, that's just a query I have, just who does this apply to within the hospital system? That's of interest. Thank you, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I was just looking online. I do need to get with LSO, our staff, see if this is defined in our statute somewhere. I did not do that. I should have, and I will do it.
So the easiest thing to do to rectify that situation is, if you chose to, would be just to strike that new language, or not, strike the language that talks about safety sensitive, and just say all hospital employees. If you're gonna, you just apply it broadly across all hospital employees. I know was not your intent of the bill, but if you want to avoid the issue of having to define what a safety sensitive duty is, that's at least a potential solution. Any comment on that? And I'll go to Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I would definitely think about that. I would definitely like to listen to what testimony we have here from our hospitals and such. Obviously, that takes in a lot more employees in a hospital, and I'm not sure if that's what I want.
Sure. We'll go to Senator Scott. He had a query or a statement.
Mr. Chairman, on that particular one, I would suggest that one possible option would be to insist that requiring safety-sensitive duties to say positions involving patient care. so that you would not catch the people in the cafeteria and some of those kinds of things, maybe the janitors. But you would catch all the people that are actually treating patients.
Thank you.
And I would suggest that the sponsor is a possibility.
Sure, thank you. Question, Senator Crum.
Mr. Chairman, just a statement would be, I think patient care leads to that same thing as sensitivity, because it's patient care. The doctor, is it the cook that's cooking the food? Is it the person cleaning the room that's, really, where does patient care draw the line to? I'm not sure patient care, with all due respect.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. So let's query with the, and I apologize, I probably got us on a rabbit trail, my apologies. So let's query with anything that you have questions about the bill, with the sponsor of the bill, and then we'll go to public testimony. Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I particularly like this bill, especially in line of what we just went through in committee of the whole. We talked about allowing pretty much students at our universities and community colleges to, if they're on drugs and they possibly overdose, to get immunity over and over and over again. So it was in line with my thought that someone has a drug problem. They're at our university, they could be a possible doctor, lawyer, teacher, nurse, whatever in the future. So I see a great need for drug testing, and I would say randomly for all employees. In the military, that's what we do, or we did. We had random testing for everyone in the military, and I don't see this as a problem. Do you, Senator Larson?
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hutchins, I agree. If they're using drugs or alcohol, I think anybody, if they test positive, they need some help, and any help we can give them is beneficial to all of us. So I would sure consider that.
Okay. Further questions for the senator? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, question for the sponsor and anybody else that testifies. What evidence do we have that there is a problem that is large enough that the hospitals in the state are not adequately taken care of, that would require this kind of a statute?
Thank you.
In other words, if we know there's drug use in society, if the hospitals are dealing with it adequately and it's not causing a problem there, then I don't see the need for the statute. If they're not dealing with it, then I do see the need.
Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Thank you,
Go ahead, Senator Larson.
Senator Scott. I, as a person that might use a hospital, I'd be very, very concerned that anybody would be potentially affected that's helping me. And I think all of us as citizens should be concerned. I don't know if the hospitals are, I don't want to say this, but are they covering them up or what? But we need to be assured that we're safe when we go there. And our condition will be dealt with professionalism. So until I hear more testimony, that would be my comment.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll go to public testimony now. Thank you, Senator. And who's going to testify? Come on up. Come on up if you're planning on testifying. I've got 1, 2 standing up. I see Workforce Services here, but I don't know if they're testifying. So let's get a couple agencies up, and then we'll go to Hospital Association. You're welcome to come up if you'd like, Mr. Wolf. We'll just line you all up. Go ahead, please start. Introduce yourselves as you know the routine, and thank you for being here, first time this year. Well, not for Ms. Hudspeth, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Franz Fuchs, Deputy Director of the Department of Health. I'm joined here with Laura Hudspeth, who leads our Office of Healthcare Licensing and Survey. We have a couple comments. First, I'd like to talk, we were sort of in an interesting position of being both the regulator in this bill, but also the regulated at our state hospital. So it's a kind of unique position I'd like to talk about the first. from a regulatory perspective, second from the state hospital perspective. We do have a couple general comments on the bill draft, and then I'm happy to stand for any questions. So.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding our Office of Healthcare Licensing and Surveys, we are obviously have the duty to come up with the rules for this program. Section, I think it's on page 2, Romanet 1, or I, little I, talks about developing the requirements. So we'd probably work with industry to develop requirements for drug testing on a random basis that are sort of balance the needs between patient safety and efficiency. That'll be our intent for effective immediately to July 1st. That'd be a rulemaking process. We definitely want to get the input of the hospitals. We don't have any good answers for you right now as far as what percentage of employees should be screened at any given frequency, but I'm sure there's best practices out there that we could leverage as well as talk to the hospitals themselves. From a regulated perspective, from the state hospital, our current policy mirrors that of the Department of Health broadly, which we do not do random drug screening. We do screening for new employees, and then we do screening if there's a reasonable suspicion by a supervisor that someone may be affected. So this would change our policy at the state hospital. At the end of the day, we would comply with it just like other hospitals would. It may have impacts on personnel, but I'm not going to come in front of you today and say that's not a reason to do this bill. So finally, on the bill itself, the safety-sensitive duties, the committee had questions on what that meant. In our policy, as a suggestion, we define safety-sensitive position as a job or position where the employee holding the position has the responsibility for his or her safety or other people's safety. Any position that has direct contact with clients or provides client care is considered a safety-sensitive position. So, Mr. Chairman, that I think kind of conforms with what Senator Scott was talking about with regarding patient care. And we'd certainly work with, if it's not defined in statute, we work in the rulemaking process to flesh that definition out.
Mr. Fuchs, just on that point, though, you just read a definition. Where does that come from?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I should have specified, that's from our policy, our Department of Health.
At your
Drug and
current
Alcohol
policy now?
Yes, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, the only other comment we have is regarding page 3, lines 13 and 14. This talks about how the second subsequent drug and alcohol test result administered an employee shall be reported to the department, who shall report the positive drug and alcohol test to the appropriate licensing board. We would just suggest removing us as the middleman and maybe basically after the comma on line 13, delete from who all the way to the next line to and basically just replace that with and to. So the hospital reports to us and the licensing board, and we're not the middleman between the hospital and the licensing board and trying to communicate any specifics on that case. It's just not a critical issue, but we thought that might help clean it up a little bit. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Recognizing that not everyone may be licensed with a board, if applicable, probably belongs there. Thank you very much. Ms. Hudspeth, did you have anything to add? Okay, very good. Are there any other personnel-related components of your current licensing process, your survey and process? Is there anything else that's more of an HR type of a component in your current licensing program, survey and licensing program? Thank you.
Chairman Barlow, the hospital rules, we survey 31 hospitals between acute care, critical access, a rehab hospital, and the psychiatric hospital. And our regulations really focus more on patient safety, adequate staffing, EMTALA, those type of issues. We really don't get involved in employee HR issues with our survey and the regulations.
Thank you. Senator Hutchings, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was on page 3 where Mr. Fuchs mentioned that they did not want to be the middleman in reporting this. Was that line, can you go through that really quickly for me again so I can?
Go ahead, Mr. Fuchs.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, so line 13 and 14.
Okay.
The process in this bill as currently drafted, the hospital will report to us regarding the second subsequent incident, and then we would report it, pass that on to the licensing board. And our suggestion is merely that the hospital report both to us and the licensing board directly, and so we're not that middle link in the chain. We'd still be reported to, we just wouldn't be passing the information along.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Further questions from the department? Mr. Crum?
Yeah, just questions, and maybe you can answer it, and maybe you can't, but in page 2, line 5, it says a random drug test. What does the word random mean? Is that monthly, yearly, once every 10 years? What does the word random mean?
Mr. Fuchs, I think you alluded to the rulemaking process, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Crum, to me, random just means that any employee would have an equal probability of being selected for screening at any time. The frequency of that, I think we'd have to determine in rule, I think, unless it's defined in statute. But I think we need to work with the hospitals, the industry, and figure out a balance there of how onerous, how costly versus the benefits from patient safety perspective.
That's fair, so it's not defined right now, that's okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Then, and you alluded on this a little bit ago, some employees, correct, don't have licensing boards, so they would just have their, I guess, test results reported to their employer, the hospital. Is that right? There are no licensing boards for some of those employees.
Mr. Fuchs, if you want to opine.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Crum, I don't want to speak out of turn. I would imagine most hospital employees are largely nursing staff, and those would all have various licensing boards, particularly in direct patient care. So I would imagine the most employees would have some kind of license. But I would defer to, or throw Ms. Hudspeth under the bus if she knows anything more detailed on that.
Laura, if you
Mr.
would.
Chairman, Senator Crum, I know there are a lot of, dietary staff, housekeeping staff, maintenance, so I don't know proportionally what they are compared to nursing and therapists and dietitians who are licensed. But I would say there are quite a few employees of a hospital who don't report to a licensing board.
Okay,
Thank you.
You mentioned 31 hospitals currently in the state by the statutory definition. How many other licensed facilities are in the state of Wyoming aside from hospitals? If we were going to make this broadly applicable in healthcare settings, licensed healthcare settings, how many others are there? Rough numbers, fine.
Chairman Barlow, just roughly, we have a total of 276 licensed and certified providers. We don't license all of those, so I would take out approximately maybe 70 or so. I can get you that number.
200 then is a
Yeah.
close number. Okay, thank you very much. Further questions for the Department of Health? Seeing none. We have the Department of Workforce Services. Mr. Wolf, great to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Wolf, Deputy Director for the Department of Workforce Services. Thought I would just come offer some testimony on the.
Would you pull that mic just a little
Sorry.
closer, please?
Yeah. Thought I would just come testify as to some of the benefits I think that an employer can experience if they do have a drug and alcohol testing program. They would qualify for a 10% discount on their base rate for their workers' compensation if they were to enroll in our discount program. That is an application process that they must go through. We do have some rules that are published on that. Actually, Mr. Chairman, one of the comments I was going to make was, from our perspective, we give a discount, a 10% discount based, on the premise that doing this type of program will reduce injuries. So it would be my recommendation that it would be, like you said, all employees. I mean, if you limit it to some employees, then those other employees are gonna know that they're not gonna be tested. And part of our rule says that they have to do at least 20% of their workers' comp covered staff in a random drug testing.
Mr. Wolf, you said 20% of their covered staff. On what kind of frequency do you?
Annually.
Annually,
And
thank
I
you.
should say 20% of their average annual staff, so annually.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? All right, questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? Do you know what the cost of a drug screening, alcohol screening test is?
Mr. Chairman, I think from a prior life, when I was in corrections, I think they're, depending on what you test for, I think they could be anywhere from like $50 to $120 a pop.
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chairman,
much. Senator Crum, you have a
Follow-up question on that. Then if it's 50 to 100, whatever it is, who pays for that?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go
good
ahead,
question.
please.
Senator Crum, the rule, as we have our rule written right now, if you're involved in our safety discount program, the employer will bear the cost of all the drug testing. I will say that it's common for workers' compensation, once they, if they filed an injury and they have to do post-accident testing, that we would cover the cost of those tests. But generally, the random testing and the pre-employment testing would fall to the employer.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're in Workforce Services.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. If I might, I would just say, too, that we had provided some information to Senator Larson. We do currently have 6 hospitals in the state enrolled in the drug and alcohol discount program. And again, we looked real finite at just the NAICS code of hospitals. We have other healthcare facilities enrolled as well, so.
Okay, thank you. I lost my train of thought. Is there any other employer that the state mandates drug testing for that you're aware of through your system, the NAICS codes you just mentioned, because that breaks it out by employers?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, at present time, there is no statutory requirement, to my knowledge, I should say, that requires any certain entity to drug test. The program that we offer is strictly voluntary, of course. They can enroll in that program, and if they meet the requirements, we give them the 10% discount.
Thank you. All right, questions, further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. Great to have you. Josh, I think you were moving this way. Anybody else want to give testimony? We have online folks. We'll get you queued up next. So if you're online, please be ready to come in when you're invited to come in. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Josh Hannes with the Wyoming Hospital Association. Just a few comments and some information for the committee as you work through this bill. So we do have a number of hospitals that currently do randomly drug tests. They have it in their policy. They have breaks on workers' comp, as you heard from Department of Workforce Services, and that's the reasoning behind it. And we have other hospitals who don't randomly test, but similar to the state employees, or the Department of Health at least, they'll be drug tested upon hire, and then if there's an incident or a suspicion of drug or alcohol use, they'll test at that point. We also have other hospitals who, for lack of a better term, reserve the right to randomly test. They don't necessarily have in their policy a cadence for that testing, but employees are notified that they could be randomly tested at some point. But these decisions are made by our local hospitals, by their local boards and administration. In the case of our hospital districts, those are elected boards, and they're making these determinations as to this policy and how they want to proceed. I think it goes without saying that if you're not currently drug testing, there's probably going to be some additional cost that the hospital is going to have to bear to do this. But the final thing I'll add, and Senator Scott touched on this too, is that I'm not aware, or have I heard about incidents where an inadequate drug testing policy is causing harm or danger. And I would offer that if there is a problem, we in our hospitals are happy to have those conversations. And maybe there's a solution that doesn't require legislation, but we certainly put a priority on safety. And if there's an issue, we want to deal with it. But I'm not aware of an issue at this point. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Hospital Association? Questions for the Hospital Association? Josh, can you give me an estimate of the number of employees of those 31 hospitals that are licensed through the Department of Health?
Mr. Chairman, I can get you a number, but I can tell you it ranges widely from, I know some of our smaller hospitals are around 100 employees, and our 2 largest ones are north of 1,500.
Okay, thank you. So a range of, for 31 hospitals, 100 to 1,500. So, all right, thank you. And obviously, we're not saying every person would be tested, but I just wanted to get some numbers out there for people to have in their mind. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Further questions? Seeing none. Okay, we're going to go online now. Anyone else in the room coming forth? Senator Brennan is hiding back there. I apologize to those folks online. I didn't see Senator Brennan. She stayed with us from the previous bill. Senator Brennan.
I was hiding, and I was slightly debating, and here I am. I'd ask the committee to seriously consider this bill and the implications it would have, and I would really urge you guys to vote no on this bill. Our hospitals do have policy in place when all of our narcotic medications are closely watched and closely tracked. And when something goes awry or something goes missing, there's policies in place to be able to test, to be able to see, to watch. I have seen our hospital do a great job. I believe the hospitals throughout the state do a good job. I would just ask that we leave this local control to the hospitals and what they do. I think Senator Scott asked a question, do we know that this is a problem? This is not a big problem. I think those that are in direct patient care take their jobs very seriously, and we aim to do no harm, and this has not been a problem throughout the state. If it was, we would be hearing about it.
Thank you, Senator Brennan. Just for those that may not know, Senator Brennan is a ICU nurse at the local hospital here in Cheyenne, so we appreciate your perspective. Further comments in the room? I'm going to actually move my head away from this microphone so I can see if there's anybody else hiding behind the pillars in the room.
Oh, I need her to be back up there. I may have a question for Abby.
All right, we'll go to online.
Excuse me.
We'll
She's
go to
leaving.
online.
I had a question for her.
Oh, sorry. Senator Brennan, I think maybe, my apologies.
No problem.
Senator Hutchings. Senator Hutchings had an inquiry for you.
Thank you very much, Senator Brennan and Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate all you do. I'm a little confused about testimony earlier in this when we talk about saving lives and maybe people being under the influence that could do harm. I don't think this bill is just dealing with drugs in the hospital and keeping them safe and sound, but we did hear discussion that we're in a society where drugs are prevalent. And marijuana use is on the rise, fentanyl. And I know that maybe there's some ways you can figure out whether someone's on drugs or not, maybe just by looking at them. But by not having these random tests, I think we're doing detriment to our society because we just don't know, because it's so prevalent. So can you give me your rationale behind, hey, it's not happening in our hospital, we're dealing with the drugs there, but what about the drugs off on the street?
Ms. Brennan, if you'd like to give a response.
Could you maybe clarify your question for me a little
Ms.
bit?
Brennan, so
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Okay,
Thank you,
go ahead.
Mr. Chair. If I can, because I know sometimes I don't say, it doesn't come out what I mean all the time, so I get corrected a lot. But there are drugs like the fentanyl, marijuana, alcohol use on the street. They're not necessarily in the hospital. And your testimony was that you protect the drugs in your hospital, but what about those drugs that are on the street that people could take and beyond while they're working? And we know it happens.
Senator Brennan.
Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you, Chairman Barlow, Senator Hutchings. Those drugs that are on the street, they can be used, but again, we've got policies in place for people to be able to be tested. It's just not always random in every hospital, but you will notice, we notice patterns. There's patterns that people will be caught up on, and it's just a policy that has worked, and that we're not, if it was a huge problem, I think we would be seeing this all over in the news and such like that.
Thank you. All right, let's go online. Thank you, Senator Brennan. Let's go online. I have Mr. Jones and Mr. Venata. And if I mispronounce that, I apologize. I'm certainly welcome the correction. Either one of them, either one of you available?
Yes, Chairman Barlow, this is Richard Jones.
Mr. Jones, please proceed. Just introduce yourself. You actually have a organization by your name too, so go ahead and introduce yourself and your organization.
My name's Richard Jones. I live in Park County. I've been a member of an organization for a couple of years called WYCAN, Wyoming Citizens Against Normalization. And that's normalization of all drugs, particularly marijuana. But we try to educate people on the issues and the facts and to prevent these kinds of things. I'd briefly like to expand upon Senator Larson's introduction of this bill. I was instrumental in this. About 2 years ago, as he stated, our local hospital here had a newspaper article. I've sent a copy of this article to each of you via email. But the HR representative of the hospital said that they were concerned because they'd had an uptick in positive test cases for primarily marijuana. And he said their hospital policy was dragnetting good employees into being fired because of these positive test cases. I thought that verbiage was quite telling, dragnetted. Well, of course, they had a random drug testing policy. And he also said that it was expensive to replace these employees, et cetera, and that they were re-looking at their drug testing policies. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And as was stated earlier by maybe Senator Larson or somebody, they also said that they'd had at least 15 people in the last couple of years who'd been testing positive. So the contention that this doesn't happen and it's not a problem is absolutely wrong. In those places where they are testing, they are finding people. Anyway, about a month later in the Cody Enterprise, the hospital HR director said that they'd finally solved the problem. They were going to eliminate their random drug testing. They would still test pre-employment and they would test for cause, but they were no longer random drug testing. I thought, well, that's great. If something's illegal and people are being arrested, make it legal. Your arrests go down. I was appalled at that statement. I wrote some op-ed pieces. I contacted my representatives about this problem. And he also stated that they were just following industry standards in the healthcare industry. And I started doing research on this, and I found out that basically there are no industry standards. The healthcare industry in the United States basically is exempt from any federal regulation concerning this issue. They do regulate transportation, truck drivers, airline pilots. There are many industries. Anything concerning interstate commerce is regulated by the federal government, and random drug testing is the gold standard for preventing these types of things. Some 60,000 truck drivers a year in the United States lose their licenses because of random drug testing. This got me to thinking about the hospitals. And again, I found out the statistics that half the hospitals in the state do not have any random drug testing policies or anything like that. And to me, this is a health and safety issue. I want to be assured. Very recently, a couple of weeks ago, I had open heart surgery in a hospital. I probably had 40 people in my room over a week's period of time. I would like to have the assurance that every person from the janitor to the surgeons is not impaired in some fashion. An LPN or a nurse or an attendant in the middle of the night making an adjustment, they confuse micrograms with milliliters on a med. It could be a fatality. This is a life and death issue. Not much different than an air traffic controller. These people are dealing with other people's lives. Again, the justification from the hospital in Cody said that this was a cost-saving matter. It cost them more money to do the random drug testing than they saved in the insurance premium discount they got from workers' comp. And they were putting their bottom line profits ahead of the protection of their patients. I was appalled at this, and I thought this was disgusting. And as I looked around the United States at drug testing policies in the healthcare industry, I found out that most states were in a similar situation where the hospitals had enough political power where they were exempt from most regulatory authorities. So they did stuff on their own. There were about a half a dozen states or more that had legislation that required healthcare industries to have random drug testing as a part of their drug policies. It came from state legislation. In discussing these matters with my representatives, including Senator Larson, We all agreed that this was a problem and that one of the solutions to it would possibly be in the future to get Wyoming legislation to require and regulate our own healthcare industries in the state. I'm very pleased at Senator Larson's diligence in getting something on the books to start this discussion. There are a few problems with it, but I do believe it should be all employees. All employees in the hospital will affect care eventually. The janitor in the middle of the night may be slightly impaired and unplug a critical machine that is hooked up to me that's keeping me alive. You can't tell what can happen when somebody is impaired. So all employees, I have no problem with random drug testing. Means that you never know when it's going to happen. Pre-employment screening has proven to be a winner in the industry. It eliminates a lot of employees, but they can pass a random test or a pre-screening test. But then when they get employed, the only thing that keeps them honest is random drug testing. Another argument I heard from the industry is, well, it affects employee morale because it's like you don't trust your employees. Actually, just the opposite is true. Good employees who aren't impaired know that some of their fellow employees may be impaired and they would like to get them caught. Anyway, I fully support this legislation. It needs a bit of tweaking and some fleshing out in terms of details, but I believe the state of Wyoming should have a policy regulating the healthcare industry, hospitals, anybody that deals with patients in a life-critical situation should be subject to a drug testing policy, and random drug testing as a part of that policy is the gold standard. So I appreciate the discussion. I have sent each of you by email a number of documents talking about this workplace situation with drug testing. I hope at some point you'll take the time to read it. And with that being said, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any questions for Mr. Jones? Questions for Mr. Jones? I don't see any right now. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Venata, are you available? Mr. Venata, are you available? We can't hear you if you are speaking. Oh, I see a camera coming.
Yes, I was being prompted into the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, please introduce yourself and provide your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. I appreciate this opportunity to testify. I am testifying as a private individual. I am a retired United States Marine, having served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. Also a retired Wyoming law enforcement officer, having served 8 years. And during that time period, also was a certified drug recognition expert. I want to commend Senator Larson and the other sponsors of this bill for doing what local control has failed to do. As Senator Larson has mentioned and Mr. Jones has mentioned, our hospital board in this community stripped away the opportunity to do random testing for drugs. As a Marine for 22 years and a law enforcement officer for 8 years, and during those 8 years, I was also a canine drug dog handler. I never popped positive for drugs once, and it wasn't because of having to take a urinalysis. I just didn't use drugs. It's not a problem if people are not using illegal drugs. If people are taking prescribed drugs, that's another thing. But if they're also taking prescribed drugs and those drugs do have an impairment effect upon them, they should be temporarily excused while they are in those, and I believe the phrase used, safety-sensitive duties. And we've got to look at the issues of impairment. You know, a lot of people like to compare drug use to, and especially marijuana, to alcohol use, but alcohol burns off at a certain rate, 0.015% per hour, and based on the amount of alcohol that you've drank or consumed, you would expect to be sober in a certain period of time. But with drugs, it's a wide ranging effect. We look at marijuana. Marijuana has an effect on people of outright being high for a 4 to 6 hour period. But when we look at impairment and their ability, in the case like operating a motor vehicle, 24 hours after using marijuana, they are considered to be impaired. We look at benzodiazepines, 10 hours to 20 hours of impairment from benzodiazepines. Opioids, 4 to 6 hours of relief, and then you're looking at a number of hours of impairment after the fact. Sleep aids, those types of things, which are really big amongst people who are working shift work, like doctors and nurses or call-ins. If they're utilizing drugs like Ambien, these are severely impairing. So it's important to, and I hate to use the word police, but being a former law enforcement officer, I use police in the sense of keeping things clean, not so much as a law enforcement perspective, and ensuring that those persons who are taking care of people at their most vulnerable times, such as when they're having surgery and they're fully incapacitated and unable to advocate for themselves, or when they are a patient in a hospital, that the people who are providing that care are not utilizing drugs illegally or even prescribed drugs that might impair them. In the circumstance where I live here in Cody, Wyoming, Mr. Jones and Senator Larson elaborated on our local hospital board doing away with drug testing. Yet marijuana is legal in Montana, and the nearest dispensary from this town is 60 miles, 120 miles round trip. I can't tell you how many times I've driven by that dispensary and have seen 11 county license plates in the parking lot. I'm sure they're not consuming that marijuana in Montana, but bringing it back to Wyoming to enjoy it here. So I think it's very, very important that a random urinalysis program be implemented in each of the hospitals around the state. And I know that there are 2 that are using it for sure, and that is the VA hospital facilities and the one at F.E. Warren Air Force Base. And it's all the employees at F.E. Warren Air Force Base, because either they're working for the federal government or they're on active duty. So I come back to Senator Brennan's comment earlier about the local control issue. Local control is failing. When we look at the 24 hospitals that were surveyed by the CEO of West Park Hospital here in Cody, the 16 who responded, 12 did not have a random testing in place, and now 13 with this very hospital here. And that is just unacceptable. For people who have access to dangerous drugs, and during my trainings as a drug recognition expert, we were instructed in what a problem drugs were in the medical community. And I believe one of the senators brought up the issue, have we had any issues here in Wyoming? And I quickly Googled while I was waiting. Here's 5 instances. October 2010, Cody doctor arrested for DWI. March 2017, Cody doctor charged at ag assault for drug use, motor vehicle crash. November 2016, Casper doctor arrested in multi-state prescription drug conspiracy. March 2019, Wyoming physician charged in unlawful drug distribution. And then December 2020, Rollins doctor sentenced for unlawful distribution of prescription pain drugs. So patients, especially those who are on pain management programs, are required to take random urinalysis to essentially prove that they're not using drugs in an improper way or commingling through polydrug use, other substances. So I think it's incumbent upon the providers and those who have access to these things and are in those sensitive duties, safety-sensitive duties, that they should be taking a urinalysis to ensure that they are providing a safe environment. And to that point, if they are using them, I think this bill addresses the fact. This bill addresses the fact. I don't think it addresses the fact that if a person does come out positive, there's a remedy there to get them away from using drugs. As popular as marijuana has become, it is still a Schedule I drug by the as listed by the DEA, and Wyoming does subscribe to utilizing that schedule for different drugs throughout Wyoming, and the prosecution of the people who utilize those drugs. So There should be a testing process. There should be an opportunity to get these people into the proper treatment and counseling and monitoring that should continue afterwards. And I believe that is all I have, Mr. Chairman, and I would be available for any questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, there is one last thing. I personally experienced issues with impairment as it goes to those in the medical community. I did have a surgical procedure at one time, and the doctor was making an incision into my ankle, and I was still fully conscious while I was strapped down on the table. And it's because somebody had forgotten to take that syringe and push that plunger into the IV to knock me out beforehand. I can tell you scalpels are very sharp. It didn't hurt that much, but the fact remained that that gentleman was getting ready to retire, and I guess they had a hell of a party the night before and forgot to push the propofol into my IV. The other thing is the injury that caused that, the on-call physician couldn't make it to the hospital that night because what I had been whispered to by the nurse was that he was impaired, and but certainly was willing to see me later on that day. So we got to face the facts that people who are working in our hospitals are a regular part of society, and people in society are using drugs, and we just have to ensure that our hospitals are safe for those patients who are in those hospitals and placing their trust in those providers and the staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to provide that testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Semper Fi. Any questions? Any questions for the Marine? Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Venata. All right, further testimony in the room. Further testimony in the room. Seeing none. All right, committee, we have 10 minutes before we reconvene upstairs for Committee of the Whole. Committee, we have Senate File 129. Any final comments from the sponsor? Senator Larson, any final comments? All right, thank you. Committee, what's your pleasure? What's your pleasure, committee? There's a motion by Hutchings. Motion by Hutchings. Discussion? Amendments? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote no on this. We know there's a general problem of drug use in society. What I don't see is evidence that our healthcare facilities are not taking adequate care, and that this will improve the care they have dealing with this.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further discussion. Senator Crum.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I really, really appreciate Senator Larson's work on this, and I think we're on the right track. I just think there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be done through the questioning today that came out. One, maybe a thought would be to apply this to all healthcare facilities, and we hear that number somewhere around 200, 276 or some numbers like that. I do think right now, if there was a huge problem with it, we would be hearing about it. Insurance companies, would be crying because there would be lawsuits in the hospitals and things like that going on. And so I don't hear that. Did hear testimony from the Department of Health that this seems to be a big problem. I did hear testimony, though, that we do have drug testing programs going on where we've caught 15 people. So current drug testing is taking place and catching people. I know hospitals have random programs now that are, I haven't heard that they're not working. I know that there's a thing. I just think right now this bill's, it's just too early. Or it needs to be bigger. So I really support what Senator Larson's trying to do, but I'm not going to support this bill.
All right, thank you. Senator Hutchins, you made the motion. Do you want to speak to the bill?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I'm surprised. Like I said, in lieu of what we just went through on the Committee of the Whole, I see this bill as being one that could help save lives. It seems like the hospitals were, the director was willing to work with the good bringer of the bill and make some good corrections. I would be willing to help with amendments as well. So I am on and for the bill, and if we do get it passed out, I'd like to get with the bringer of the bill and the director and get those amendments put in for maybe a committee of the whole reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is actually something that's well-suited for an interim topic. I think there's, for multiple reasons. One, if we're going to be specific to different types of employees, or whether it's all employees, that's a big question, just right off the bat. And if the state's going to require this, what responsibility does the state have to pay for it? If there's other programs that we have that are voluntary and they get a benefit, now we're going to put something, require something, what role does the state have in providing something for that, both on private businesses and in, the other thing is surgery centers do some of the same things that hospitals do, and they're not, I mean, it's the breadth of the facilities as well. So I think there's a good conversation to be had here. I agree. But at this time, I think there's much more work to be done, and anyway, any further discussion? Further discussion? Let's call roll on Senate File 129, hospital employee drug and alcohol testing.
This is a roll call vote for Senate File 129. Senator Crum,
No.
Senator Hutchings, Senator Scott,
No.
Senator Steinmetz,
Senator Steinmetz did not leave a vote for this bill.
Chairman Barlow.
So she is excused. My apologies, she's excused. No.
Mr. Chairman, that is 1 aye, 3 no, and 1 excused.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Larson. He's already gone. Please consider thinking about it as an interim topic. Have a good day. We are adjourned, committee. We have 2 bills up before us next week. 113 on Monday, 113 Brader Opportunity Act, and 112 Anesthesiologist Assistance Licensing. Thank you.